Hello, my name is Paolo Annino, and I teach here at FSU College of Law. I am very honored to be talking today about special education law. And I want to thank Alan Abramowitz and Thomasina Moore for inviting me to share with you some thoughts about special education and how we can help our children who are in the foster care system with special education issues. Now, we know quite a bit about children in the foster care system here in Florida. We know that almost 50% have a disability. So almost 50% of all children in our foster care system have a disability. We also know that over 50% of the children are below grade level. That means if they're in the 8th grade, they're reading in the 6th, 5th grade level. So they're in below grade level over 50%. And the significance of that, that the majority of our children in the foster care system are below grade level, is that creates frustration. And then eventually, if the frustration isn't resolved, what we're going to find is these children dropping out of our school systems. So, and the one last fact I want to bring across is that we know the majority of the children in the foster care system change schools at least once during the school year. The consequence of changing schools is serious. It disrupts their educational program. And again, it's one of the reasons why children in the foster care system are below their grade level. So what I want to do today is introduce you to special education law and how you can help children in the foster care system with special education issues. I divided my talk into 6 separate parts. The first part deals with a free and appropriate public education and deals with the major law that we're going to be talking about today. And that law is called the Individuals with Disability Education Act. The Individuals with Disability Education Act. In short, we call it IDEA. Individuals with Disability Education Act. That is the major federal law that we'll be talking about today, that what provides protections for Florida's children and all children in all 50 states who have special education issues. So the first part then we'll be talking about the goal of IDEA, and that goal is to provide a free and appropriate public education. And we're going to spend time talking about what does it mean to provide a free and appropriate public education. The second part of our 6-part series is on evaluations. We're going to talk about the importance of evaluations and how through evaluations we're able to create and provide the child a free and appropriate public education. The third part will discuss the individual education plan process and the components of an individual education plan. Again, it's going to rely on the evaluations and it's going to rely on the goal, which is a free and appropriate public education. The fourth part is a how-to part. How to advocate at an individual education plan meeting. And that is the primary problem-solving forum that most special education cases go to and where most special education cases get resolved in. So it's very important that you know how to advocate at an individual education plan meeting. The fifth part, is on discipline. And why I do a separate part on discipline is based on what we talked a little earlier about frustration. Most of these children in the foster care system are below grade level. And just being below grade level creates frustrations in the school system. These children, in addition to just being below grade level, have a whole slew of stressors in their lives. They've been abused, neglected, abandoned. They're living in foster homes. They're changing from one foster home to another foster home. So there's lots of stressors, lots of frustration. And one way these stressors and frustrations emerge is through having disciplinary problems at school. So We're going to do a whole section dealing with how to advocate and help a child during the disciplinary process. And the last section is what I call the appeals. So what are the appeal processes here if you do not reach an agreement at the individual education plan meeting? Also, we're going to talk about two of the other major special education laws, and that is the Rehabilitation Act we're going to be talking about that law, the federal act, and we're going to be talking about something uniquely Florida, so it doesn't apply to Georgia or any other southern states. It's a uniquely Florida statute called the McKay Scholarship, or McKay Statute. And we're going to talk about the McKay Statute today too, because that also will impact your decisions and how to advocate for the child. So to begin now with the first part, we're going to begin this part talking about the Individuals with Disability Education Act. My favorite author is William Faulkner. And William Faulkner says, tomorrow began 10,000 years ago. Well, I'm not going to talk 10,000 years ago, but I do need to go back a little to 1975. That's when the Individuals with Disability Education Act was enacted. At that time, it was called a different name, but for our purposes, we're calling it IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act. In 1975, the primary purpose of the Individuals with Disability Education Act was to open up the schoolhouse door. Was to open up that door. Because what Congress found was over 1 million children, repeat, over 1 million children in the United States were totally excluded from the schoolhouse based on their disability. In addition to over 1 million children being totally excluded based on disability, you might ask, well, how were they excluded? Well, certain states, say the state of Pennsylvania, for example, had a state statute that's explicitly stated that if a child had an intellectual disability, they were not allowed in the schoolhouse. Now, Florida, we also had a very long history of segregating children with disabilities. In Florida, in 1921, for those folks who know Gainesville, there used to be a huge compound, a 3,000-acre compound, called the Farm Colony for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. The Farm Colony for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. And that went from 1921 to 1961. And we were simply dumping children with disabilities in that farm colony and not providing services. So Florida was like the rest of the country prior to 1975 in segregating and excluding children from the school systems. And finally, with IDEA, the Congress then forced school districts all around the country to open up the schoolhouse door. Another thing Congress found was for those children who were not 100% excluded, but those children who were allowed in the schoolhouse door, two things were happening. One is over 4 million children in the schoolhouse now were not receiving the appropriate education. They were being warehoused. And so Congress was very much concerned about that problem, and Congress was concerned about another problem too. The third problem they were concerned about was the kids in the schoolhouse were being expelled at an exponential rate. Based on what? Based on their disabilities. So you had a child, for example, who was profoundly autistic, who would then have a crisis, and they would expel the child from the school district. So Congress then, back in 1975, was concerned about the exclusion of over 1 million children from the schoolhouse, and they were concerned about what was happening to the children while in the schoolhouse. And as we said, there was two things happening. They were not receiving the appropriate education, and the second thing, large amounts of these children were being expelled based on their disabilities. So how was Congress going to deal with this in 75? So Congress dealt with it by creating Individual Disability Education Act and made a goal. And we're going to be talking about this goal throughout our 6-part series. And this goal is called a free and appropriate public education. A free and appropriate public education. That is the goal for IDEA. So every child now, based on federal law, is required to receive, who is a special education child, is required to receive a free and appropriate public education. And one thing that everyone agrees upon, that what a free and appropriate public education means is, it's an education in the schoolhouse. That schools can no longer exclude children with disabilities from the schoolhouse. So one of the big issues that occurred is, what is this? What is a free and appropriate public education? So now we're going to let all these kids, millions of children then, all at once now, are being allowed in the schoolhouse. What are they going to get in the schoolhouse? What type of education are they going to receive in the schoolhouse? Well, the law requires the school district to provide a free and appropriate public education. So in 1982, there was the Supreme Court case. It's called Board of Education v. Raleigh. Board of Education v. Raleigh, 458 U.S. 176. 458 U.S. 176. This really is the major case that interprets what a free and appropriate public education is. And we learned quite a bit about this concept through the Raleigh decision. What did we learn? Well, one thing we're going to learn in the Raleigh case is a free and appropriate public education is not, repeat, is not an education that maximizes your benefits. So it's not an education that's going to maximize the child's potential. So okay, so it doesn't maximize the child's potential, then what does it do? Well, let me talk about the case itself, and maybe that might help explain what the Supreme Court held. The case involves a little girl, Amy Raleigh. Amy Raleigh is hearing impaired. She is deaf. Her parents, who are also deaf, request a hearing impaired translator for little Amy in her school in New York State, Peekskill, New York. They request a hearing impaired translator for her entire day. That's what they make their ask. And we're going to spend time talking about the ask, right? You know, they were very clear what their ask was. And that's one thing I hope to bring across during the 6-part series, that advocates out there at the Guardian Ad Litem program are clear on what they're actually asking from the school district. And in this case, the parents were very clear. They knew what they wanted. They knew what they thought was best for their child. They knew what they thought would maximize the child's educational opportunities. They asked for a translator throughout the day. The school district disagreed. They went through something called an IEP meeting, Individual Education Plan meeting, we'll talk about in a later segment. And they disagreed on what would be a free and appropriate public education for Amy. The school recommended instead a 1-hour tutor, a special hearing impaired tutor each day. They also suggested a FM radio type system, although all the documentation was the child had minimal of any hearing at all, so I'm not sure how that would have helped. And then 3 hours of speech therapy. It goes all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court said, well, a free and appropriate public education is an education that lets the child in the schoolhouse. So the first thing is schoolhouse. The child a free and appropriate public education allows the child in the schoolhouse. The second thing the case said is, in the schoolhouse, the child has to receive some benefit. The child has to receive some benefit while in the schoolhouse. And then the question is, okay, what does that mean? What does some benefit mean? Justice Rehnquist says that some benefit means whatever the specific facts shake out. It's fact specific what some benefit means. He specifically states in the Raleigh decision, there is no test. There is no test to determine some benefit. So what do we know about free and appropriate public education? It's an education that you're in the schoolhouse, they can't exclude you. It's an education you get some benefit, but what is the test of the benefit? How thick is the benefit? How thin is the benefit? Again, it's fact specific. And the third is we know it doesn't maximize. It's not a benefit that maximizes your potential. It's not a benefit that maximizes your potential, but it is a benefit and you get some benefit. In the case of Amy Raleigh, the court said she was getting some benefit. Why? She was a smart little girl and she was passing from grade to grade and her grades were above average. So the court said, we're seeing some benefit for this fact-specific case, and the court found that the school district was providing her a free and appropriate public education. So after the Raleigh decision, then, we're left with a standard of free and appropriate public education that is extremely broad. A mastodon could walk right through it, in other words. Extremely broad. What is some benefit? The court says there's no test. So it really depends on the facts of the particular case. It depends on the decision maker in the particular case. Okay, so for this part then, what we learned, the main thing to take away from part one is that there is a federal law that protects our children, special education, that all our children by federal law are mandated to receive a free and appropriate public education, and that we know that a free and appropriate public education is a public education that your child's in the schoolhouse, receives some benefit. And the other thing we learned from this section, this part, is that it is important. I thought the Raleigh parent did a good job. It's important to be clear on what exactly you're asking. The next section we'll talk about is evaluations, and that is going to be the section where we learn how to create an individual education plan that provides a free and appropriate public education. Thank you.